Hi, and welcome to another edition of Jules Voto's Photo Focus. If you've been following my channel, you'll have noticed that recently I've been doing a lot of videos on the Nikon Z8, and several of those videos were on photographing birds with the Z8 and the 7200 2.8 zoom and the 2-time teleconverter. Some of the images for those videos were shot at the Edwin Forsyth Wildlife Refuge in New Jersey, and some were shot in my backyard. I have bird feeder and a perch set up for the birds behind my deck, and I've shot a lot of images that way. Now, when I first started shooting birds back in early 2019, my best camera for that was a D7100. And at the time, I was using the D7100 with a 300mm f4 Nikon lens and a 1.4 teleconverter. So that gave me a lot of reach. And it was working out good. Then I got a D500. But what I decided to do, I have since sold the D500, but what I wanted to do is just take a look at how good is the D7100 today in 2023 shooting these backyard birds. So what I did, I mounted my 70-200 f4 f-mount zoom, used my monopod, and shot a bunch of images through the back door. And I'm going to show you a lot of those images shortly, but I just want to talk a little bit about the D7100. The D7100 is 10 years old. It came out in early 2013, and I picked mine up a few months after it was out, and it was my primary camera for a while. Now, I have a video that was shot in 2022 on the 7100. It explains why I felt it was a great buy for someone just starting out or somebody on a budget and wanted to get into digital photography. You can still find these bodies under $300. So it's a great buy, again, especially if you are on a budget. And it makes a decent platform for photographing birds. Birds in flight, not so much, although I've done some things with that back in 2019. But shooting birds in the backyard, it works out really nice. Now, the D7100 is a crop sensor camera. It's a DX format, APS-C format camera. It has a 24 megapixel sensor. And it also has a 1.3 time crop mode. So what that will do, it will give you a 15.4 megapixel image. And with this 200mm lens here, with the 7200 at 200, with the DX crop, it gives you the equivalent of a 300mm lens. And then when you switch to the 1.3 time additional crop, it gives you the equivalent of a 390mm lens, so almost a 400mm f4 lens. So it worked out really great. We're going to look at some pictures, just a few more things. The one negative with this camera is the buffer. Now, it has in DX mode a frame rate of 6 frames a second. When you go to the 1.3 crop, it gives you 7 frames a second. However, the buffer is very small. With DX, it will give, and shooting RAW, it will give you 6 frames before the buffer fills. And if you're shooting JPEG, it will give you 50 frames. So in JPEG, it's more than adequate. When you go to the crop mode, the 1.3 crop mode, in RAW, you'll get like 9 frames before the buffer fills. So it's not the greatest for birds in flight. But for shooting those backyard birds, the birds on a perch, the birds sitting on the fence, the birds at the feeder, it worked out really good. Is it as good as the Nikon Z8? No, of course not. We're talking about a 10-year-old camera as opposed to a brand new camera. And, you know, there's no comparison as far as all the features, the frame rate, the buffer capacity, and things like that. And of course, the Z8 has animal detect. It will focus right on the eyes of the bird. But I'll tell you, you can get some really nice results with the D7100. So you don't need the latest camera to get some really good pictures. So if you already have a 7100 or you're on a budget and you're looking to pick up a digital camera, I think the 7100 is a great choice. Now, I'm using the 70-200 zoom on this camera, but Nikon makes an excellent 70-300. So I would look for one of them if you're really into doing bird photography. Now, one other thing, about 2 years after the introduction of the 7100, Nikon introduced the D7200, and it has some improvements, but the major improvement with that camera is the buffer. It has a much larger buffer and actually would be a better choice, especially if you're going to be shooting birds in flight. So, okay, let's go over and look at some images. Now, these first couple images you see here were shot with the 300 f4 with the 1.4 converter with the 7100. And then they were cropped even a little bit more. Now, most of the images you're going to see here were heavily cropped. And here is one that was really cropped quite a bit. And here's the image without cropping. So you can see how much these were cropped in. And this was shot with the 7100, with the 70-200 at 200. So that gives you the equivalent of a 300. And then the additional 1.3 crop gives you the equivalent of a 390 millimeter lens. You will also notice very little noise. ISO varied from 800 to a lot of the pictures shot on the fence, like this one. This was at 800, but the shots on the feeder and on the house with the suet and up in the trees, they were primarily shot between 1250 and 1600, and then of course cropped quite a bit, and yet you see very little noise, and I used no noise reduction whatsoever. It was the standard picture control. I was in continuous high. This one here is not perfectly sharp. I just kept firing as the bird flew in. The wings are blurry because of, too slow a shutter speed. This here is Chippy, our friendly neighborhood chipmunk, who comes onto our deck, jumps on this wicker chair, onto the fence, and then onto the feeder. So you're going to see a lot of pictures of him. I was trying to catch him jumping off. Okay, this one is on the fence, so it was an ISO of 800. Matrix metering. On some of these images of the birds up on the perch, I had a minus 1 or minus 0.07 exposure compensation because of the dark background, and the birds were kind of blown out a little bit. Again, these are at 800. There's absolutely no noise at 800 with the 7100. Like I said, it's good up to 1600. In this one, there's movement in the wings. The shutter speed was about 1,000th of a second. Of course, a faster shutter speed would have froze the wings, but I kind of like this. And also, you would have got more images to choose from if you were at a higher frame rate with, on a camera like the Z8. Focus, I put the focus point. I was using a single focus point and just trying to place it on the eye. And we're back to Chippy again. He is really fast, much faster than a squirrel, and it was really tough. Sometimes he would pause on the wicker as he went. And here he is coming off. Now I focused on the right a little bit, pre-focused, and held it there because I knew when he jumped off, it would be hard to get him sharp. So I was hoping for depth of field to keep him sharp. Now, if you look at this bird, in his mouth, he has a sunflower seed. And these birds are amazing. He opens the shell to get the seed out. And you can see that here, hopefully, that he's cracked it open. Really, nature is really amazing. Now this, I was focusing on that bird on the lower left, and then this one up top. I didn't even notice it when I shot it. And here he is coming in. And again, these are at about 1,000th of a second. F8. Now these two got really close but never touched. Sometimes you will see them feed each other. I have pictures that I shot with the Z8 of birds feeding one another. You got to be really patient when photographing birds and chipmunks. I wasn't quick enough here. This is where pre-capture on the Z8 would be nice. And here he's trying to jump back up onto the fence, and he's back down again. I mean, he was doing this constantly. Every few minutes he would come back, get some birdseed, come onto the deck, leave the deck, and come back. And here's a blue jay. This blue jay was hanging around. And I think if you're going to do this, you want to have a bird feeder with bird seed. But also, I bought this little house. It was very inexpensive at Lowe's for suet. Some of the birds prefer the suet. And this is a shot that I don't even know if the Z8 could have got. I put the focus point on him, and I was able to get him in focus. But with that leaf right near his eye, that could have been a little tricky for the Z8. And here's a bird taking off. It's not the sharpest. It's just, you really need patience, shoot a lot of pictures. And this is probably the best one of Chippy jumping off. I just was determined to get him a shot of him in midair. And now he jumped onto the wicker and is on his way back to wherever he came from. He comes to visit just about every day. And here you can see the suet in the blue jay's mouth. Then he's back on the wicker, back on the fence, and these are at ISO of 800. So I'm really very pleased with the 7100. No, of course it's not a Z8, but it's also, if you figure you pay $300 for one, it's $3,700 cheaper than buying a brand new Z8. And not everybody could afford a $4,000 camera. And you know, if you're a professional, you earn your living in photography, then you could justify it. But a 7100 works out wonderfully. In fact, it was my primary camera until I purchased the D810. So if you're interested in doing bird photography, you're on a limited budget, I think the 7100 works out great. The 7200 would even be better because of the larger buffer. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I come out with a new video every Wednesday morning at 11 a.m. And if you have any questions on bird photography or photography in general, please leave your question in the comments below or email me. I respond to all emails and all questions. So thanks for watching, and I will talk to you next time.